Hello everybody, I'm InTheLittleWood, also known as Martin, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're going to dive into another brand new blog post from Hytale.com and the Hypixel team. This week, we're discussing the behaviours of different NPCs inside of the game. So this blog post is filled with a lot of technical jargon, and I don't fully understand all of it, but we're going to try our best to see what's going on here. And of course, if I'm incorrect about stuff, feel free to let me know in the comment section below, but don't be a dick about it. So let's start by explaining what behaviours are. Similarly to human behaviours, these are basically different ways that monsters, animals, basically all non-playable characters in the world react to particular prompts. Whether that prompt is them taking damage to trigger a fight or flight mechanic, it could be one type of mob coming within a certain radius of another kind of mob, or maybe even just responding to a change in weather. You get the gist. So they ease us in with the information that although the game, well, I guess technically the client, does run on C#, there is still a degree of Java happening in the background of the game, which given Hypixel Studios' roots, isn't surprising. So the behavioural system runs on something known as JSON codes or scripts. Essentially, this is going to mean that we're going to have loads of predefined codes that we don't have to type out ourselves because the Hytale team will have already done it for us. So you can create any array of mobs inside of the Hytale model maker, and you can go, you know what, I want it to behave exactly like a Trork. It's literally going to be as simple as a copy and paste job. Brilliant. Having said that though, if you really want to, you can code your own stuff from the ground up, and you can also chop and change the stuff that they've already created to give a more custom experience. So let's jump into example number one. First, we're showing this image right here of a sentry Trork and a big old cascade of text on the left hand side. So we'll try and work from top to bottom and explain what each of these elements actually means. Some of them I know, quite confidently, and some of them not so much. So the first little block of text at the top talks about sensors. Essentially, the sensor is what the mob uses to detect certain things throughout the world, and at the moment it says any, so I'm assuming there might be some that are based on sound, maybe some that are based on sight, maybe some are based on, impact, or maybe even some are triggered actually by a physical switch. So let's move on to the block of text number 2. So right here we can see the word range. So essentially this is the radius around the mob that it will detect the player or any other mobs if they happen to be looking for them. At the moment I'm not entirely sure what the measurement is because it says 30, but I can't imagine that it would be 30 blocks away that the Trork would notice you. So I'm guessing maybe it's like 10 per block, maybe? Like a 30 radius seems quite sensible there. So you've stepped within the range of 30, and that is going to trigger what is known as a beacon. This isn't something physical that you can see. This is essentially a signal emitted from the Trork to other nearby Trorks. So you can see at the very top there, we've got the word beacon. That's the beacon. Then beneath it, we've got Trork enemy sighted. So that is the message it is conveying to nearby targets. And then, of course, it defines right beneath that the target group it wants to send this message to are other Trorks. And then I'm assuming that final line of text there that says send lock target position is actually your location that it's trying to transmit to the other enemies. And then we move on to the final little block of text just beneath that, which basically says play animation, and it's going to be alerted. So essentially the mob is going to move or react in some kind of way that signifies to the player that they've been spotted. The rest of the code that continues downward on that image I'm not going to try and dive into because we can't obviously see the finished version of it, so let's leave that there for now, and let's move on to the next paragraph of text. So they go on to discuss how players won't need to define every single action that a mob undertakes when, for example, they might be pursuing you, the player. They aren't going to have to code out every single sword swing or every evasive sidestep or every shield up. The Hytale team are trying to simplify that process for most of us that don't have that coding knowledge by having simple phrases like seek or flee. So of course seek is where essentially the mob is going to seek you out and try to take you down, or flee, of course, is when they've taken either so much damage or they just see you in general, they might try and leg it. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate this. We're only sort of skimming the surface of what this system is capable of. They've ensured us that it can do so many things, and I think it's going to be amazing because I think everybody can be quite proficient with the model maker, but coding is a little bit more difficult to wrap your head around. But with these simple drag and drops, it's going to make it brilliant. They're really emphasizing the point as well that these systems are going to be editable and interchangeable, so they're not precious about their template remaining the same. They want players to sort of have a little fiddle with the code, tweak stuff, add stuff, remove stuff in order to give more unique experiences to the Hytale audience. So if you want to have a mob that can only detect you from, say, a range of 10, then that can work. And in fact, we actually get a demonstration of this in this next video. So in this next clip, we can see a Trork hunter, unfortunately missing its pet wolf, but it notices a nearby bear and gives it a little wave. So again, let's have a little look at the code and sort of break this down piece by piece. So you can see right here, we have got a sensor that is looking for mobs, and then just a little bit beneath that, 2 lines down, it actually tells you which kinds of mobs it's actually trying to see. So in this case, it's looking for a bear, and it's only looking for bears that are within 10 range of it. Before we leave the code inside of this section, I want to quickly talk about the include groups option. So within that at the moment, it's only looking for bears to trigger a certain kind of action, but I am wondering if there are going to be other sort of elements of coding inside of there that can allow us to set a broader umbrella of things to look for, like whether you could simply say animals, or if you could say players, or other NPCs, and obviously we've already seen that you can specify via race as well. Maybe this will just be one of those things where if you wanted it to detect larger animals, you would have to do like quotes bear, quotes polar bear, quotes yeti, and so on and so forth for all of those larger mobs. Or maybe to make it a little bit easier, maybe you've got a mob that's particularly aggressive or is particularly responsive to other creatures, but it only ignores a very small subset. Maybe there'll be an exclude groups option. I can't imagine there wouldn't be. One final teeny tiny thing to point out, which I think is quite interesting, is that if you have a little look at the code just before it fades off of the screen, you can see that there's a message there for a beacon, which is obviously when it detects the mob, and then it does the message of companion attack. So obviously, with this being a hunter trork, that would probably be the prompt for its wolf to then charge at the enemy. So what's really cool about this is we now know that there is some kind of companion parameter or attribute that you can give to any kind of mob, which is awesome, whether it be your own creation, or maybe that's going to be all part of the taming system as well. That excites me. Although I know my voice doesn't sound very excited today because I feel a little bit sick, so shh. Anyway, continuing on through the blog post, and we get to learn about how the behavior system actually breathes more life and personality into the creatures of Orbis. There's a whole paragraph where they talk about trorks actually sparring with one another. That's right, they literally, if they get bored and they're near one another, they would just randomly start punching each other until one of them gets knocked out and they have their state changed from idle to nap. So one trork will literally put another one to sleep. Brilliant. And we have had demonstrations of these sorts of behaviors before, like the way that the ducks used to look at one another in that little clip that we saw from the pond. Sometimes the ducks will bob their head underneath the water. It just adds a little bit more realism to it all. So now we finally get to see a demonstration of one piece of code that has been coming up again and again in the examples that we've had so far, and that has been play animation and then the animation of alerted. So right here we can see that there's a hunter trork that's noticed a big old juicy bit of meat and it's gotten very excited about it, run over and decided to have a little nom. Can you imagine being in a combat encounter with a trork, or like just generally just out in the world and tidying up your inventory, and suddenly something sweeps in and steals your lunch? I'm really digging the little exclamation marks that appear above the character as well. It's giving me some real like Metal Gear Solid, or maybe even like slightly Zelda vibes. Like in my head I'm thinking, I really want to recreate the hedge maze bit from Hyrule Castle. That would be great. So one of the downsides with Minecraft, in my opinion, has always been that the mobs have been too simplified and too easy to deal with. So if, for example, if you've got a skeleton, all you need to do is bring up a shield, or you can even simply just get closer and then that range is closed and you can start attacking them, and they don't have any kind of consequence for getting that up in their face. Turns out in Hytale, we will have a system like that. So one of the coders, Eric, was actually talking about how he applied an extra bit of code to a trork so that it began as an archer, but once that gap was closed and you were physically up in front of it, it would actually change weapon to a melee stance. This is really exciting. This could mean that we actually have boss fights that actually have phasers. Can you imagine that once their health reaches a certain level, or once certain triggers have gone into place, the mobs will actually do something entirely different? They'll have whole new mechanics. It's not like the Ender Dragon fight where it just sweeps around, flies and breathes fire occasionally, and that's all it does on repeat until you've killed it. There are actually going to be stages, I hope. So at the beginning of this recording, I actually did spitball the idea of mobs actually reacting to weather conditions. Turns out that's actually in the game. I've hit the nail on the head. So in this clip right here, we see a warrior trork going through various different states. So it starts off in a state of sleep or rest, and that's basically outside just chilling out doing his thing, and then the rain begins and that actually triggers the change to awaken. That then has two subsequent animations that kick in. So it has one where it's waking up and sort of shaking its head being like, oh god, what day is it? And then it looks upwards and sort of waves its arms around being like, oh come on, not rain, until eventually it triggers a behavior that I can only assume is going to be named shelter or seek warmth. Something along those lines, where essentially the trork moves itself under cover or towards a fire to dry itself off. brilliant. I just think all of this detail is really important and really special. Like, if you come across a camp and you're trying to gauge how many enemies there are, there's going to be like this living, breathing environment at the bottom of the valley that you're overlooking, and it just, it's really cool, isn't it? It really is. Just one final detail that I've noticed as well watching this back is the fact that the actual sky in the environment changes colour and tone when that weather initiates. Now, this could just be a sunrise sequence, but it doesn't seem as though it changes after a certain point. So here on the left is the before, and here on the right is the after the rain. So whilst we're on the topic of observing other races and creatures, that is kind of how this week's blog post rounds out. So we get a little bit more information about the Quebecs. So it turns out that everybody's favourite little plant people don't actually get their nutrition and all of their sort of stamina, I guess, from food and things like that, like other people do. Instead, all they've got to do is lay out in the sun and absorb those sweet, sweet rays. And then I guess they've got some weird like photosynthesis thing going on, and then that's how they basically conserve energy, which is brilliant. So that makes it all the more interesting about these characters, because I don't understand how they get into conflicts with other creatures like the Trorks, because they're clearly not going to be fighting over food. But anyway, let's move on to the final image of this week, and that is of a goblin. Apparently, they just like making their problems go away by blowing them up, but consequently, they also make more problems for themselves. They're not the sharpest tools in the box. So there we go, that's it for today's video, and I'm going to pass a question off to you as always. What kinds of animations, behaviours, or sequences do you want to see in the Hytale library for everybody to use? One of the ones I was thinking up is maybe when you die and if you happen to drop all of your loot, maybe there can be like a vulture or some kind of eagle that would sort of, you know, circle around it in the sky, you know, like they do in the desert. Even just little passive things like maybe the tree singers, those special elders that are from the Quebec race. Maybe occasionally you'll just see them walk by a tree and stop, have a little chat with it because they can commune with the spirits inside, and maybe it just gives the tree a little pat to say, good lad. And then my final one is a little bit more complex, but I think it's totally doable, even just from the demonstrations we've had so far. So I'll set the scene. You've walked over towards a camp, you haven't been detected yet, you're not within their range, and there's a big huddle of goblins all stood together. How about if you were to hit one with a magical spell, or if you were to hit one with an arrow, any kind of ranged ability that won't trigger the range, but would deal damage in an instant. Whether that actually kills the mob or not doesn't really matter too much, but I would just love to see the mad scramble and panic from all of the surrounding goblins who are freaking out, not knowing where that shot came from. It would either trigger a flee animation where they just start running away, or maybe they'll make a mad scramble for their weapon that lays on a bench nearby, or maybe they'll just go into full cower mode and just stay frozen. All of those things that I've just mentioned I think are completely achievable, which is really exciting, and I'm stoked because this seems like a system where as much as you put into it is as much as you'll get out of it, and I think it can get really complex. So there we go everybody, thank you so much for watching. Those are some of my examples. I can't wait to hear about yours. As always, if you want to talk anything about Hytale, we of course have the comment section below, or we actually have a Hytale dedicated chat over on my Discord. The URL as always is discord.gg/InTheLittleWood, and I can't wait to read all of your thoughts and theories inside of there. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you all next week. Bye bye.